On the 8th of April 2005, 23-year-old Emer O'Loughlin was on a day off from college as the funeral of Pope John Paul II was taking place and the colleges were closed as a mark of respect. This day, unfortunately, would also be her last day on this earth. Emer grew up in Ennistamon, a market town in County Clare. Ireland in the 80s was blighted by emigration and unemployment. There were few prospects for the younger generation, and many had left, including Emer's older sister Pamela, who went to England when she was just 16. And Emer would have been only about 4 or 5 years of age at this time, so Pamela didn't get to see her little sister grow up. But she did keep in constant contact with her, and when she came back to Ireland for a visit, Emer was her first port of call. Emer was a happy little soul, and she could sing before she could speak. She was a real animal lover, especially for her dog and pony. Her dad bought her a Welsh pony which she would ride every day, and he was even allowed into the house. When Emer was 9 years old, her parents split up and her mother moved to Dublin. But Emer didn't want to go. She wanted to stay at the place she called home, so she continued living with her dad, Johnny. They went everywhere together, and her dad described her as his little shadow. When she went to secondary school, she was well liked. She was described as quiet and kind-hearted and got on with not only her peers but the teachers also. She was a good listener, a natural leader, and had plenty of self-confidence. She would speak her mind and it stood out to everyone. And she also had good organisational skills which came in handy with school projects when she was in transition year in school. Transition year was the 4th year in school where students took a break from academics and focused more on practical skills. Students went out into the world and volunteered in companies and businesses, and in exchange they would receive training in whatever field they were interested in. There was also a mini company competition that schools all around Ireland took part in. Whoever won overall were then given money to set up the business for real. This is where Emer would shine, as it was her group that would go on to win the competition. She also loved art, and like everything she put her hand to, she was very good at it. Her favourite thing to draw was daffodils. Photography was also a pastime she loved, and she longed to own her own camera. But money was tight, and unfortunately her dad couldn't afford to buy her one of her own. When Emer left school, she gave herself some time out to decide what path she was going to take in life. She worked in the local town and continued to live with her dad. Eventually she would leave Ireland, following in her sister Pamela's footsteps, but she would go further afield and move to Holland, where she worked on the tulip farms over there for 2 years. After this she went to Thailand with her boyfriend Shane, and there they would stay for 3 months. During this time, Emer did a lot of growing up and loved all the travelling they did. But home was calling them, and so their next move would be a permanent one, home to Ireland. Shane's family had a bit of land, and so when they came home, they bought a mobile home to live on the land, in the hope of building their own house someday. The area they were living in was Ballyborna, which is close to the Clare-Galway border, and in an area known as the Burn. The Burn, meaning rocky place, is part of the Wild Atlantic Way, and if any of you ever get to visit Ireland, it is definitely a place worth visiting. There is a scenic drive you can take, and it is 150 kilometres, and you will see a landscape like no other. It is absolutely breathtaking. The Burn is renowned for its remarkable assembly of plants and animals, and over 70% of Ireland's species of flower are found here. The region supports Arctic, Alpine and Mediterranean basin plants, which can be found side by side due to the unusual environment. The land that Emer and Shane lived on was very isolated. They had one neighbour living nearby, and his name was John Griffin, who lived in a caravan and was squatting on the land that Shane's family owned. Shane worked, but Emer did not. She spent all her time painting and taking photographs of the landscape around her. But as time went on, she decided to enrol in the Galway Mayo Institute of Technology to study photography and art. It would be a 2.5-hour commute each day to college, but Emer was happy to do it. In April 2005, she had just been accepted into the National College of Art and Design in Dublin. She was to start this college in the September of the same year. Emer was elated with this news. It gave her the recognition that she had a talent for what she loved to do. When she told her mother her good news, she also asked her if she could stay with her while she attended college in Dublin. Her mother was more than delighted to have her, as she hadn't lived with Emer since she was 9 years old. So this brings us to Friday the 8th of April 2005. As I said already, the college Emer was attending was closed due to the Pope's funeral. But Shane had to go to work that day, and so this left Emer at home on her own. For some reason, the mobile home had no electricity that day, and Emer needed to charge her phone. Shane suggested for her to call to the nearby neighbour John Griffin to see if he had electricity, and would he be willing to let her use it. Shane kissed Emer goodbye, and it would be the last time he'd ever see her alive again. A few hours later, Shane received a phone call telling him that his neighbour's caravan was on fire. As I said before, Griffin was squatting on Shane's land, and so that is why he was called upon first. People back then would burn on their own land, especially in isolated areas, and so I would say the caller to Shane was unsure if the fire was intentional or not, and they didn't want to be ringing the emergency services for nothing. So basically Shane would be the one responsible to ring for the fire brigade. Shane made his way to where the fire was, and as soon as he saw the fire, he knew it was Griffin's caravan that had gone up in flames. At around 4 p.m, the Gardaí and fire brigade arrived. When the fire had been put out and the remains of the fire were examined, they would make a horrific discovery. A human body was among the ashes. When Gardaí questioned Shane on who it might be, his only answer was it had to be Griffin. Shane went to his own mobile home and he found it to be empty. Emer's keys and wallet were on the countertop, but there was no sign of Emer anywhere, and the dogs were not tied up. If Emer was to go anywhere far from home for a time, she would always tie up the dogs before she left. Shane tried to ring Emer's phone, but there was no answer. It was then panic really set in, and it was at this time he contacted Emer's father and brothers. On hearing the news that Emer was missing, they headed straight up to Ballyborna to search for her, but it was futile. Emer's brother John decided to go to Dublin to tell his mother that she was missing and there had been a fire at the neighbours. Next, he flew to England to tell his sister Pamela, as it wasn't something you'd want to hear over the phone. Pamela flew back to Ireland with her brother and continued the search together for Emer. The Gardaí wanted to find Emer and Griffin as they were both now classed as missing. The body in the fire had still not been identified at this stage. If Griffin or Emer were alive, they were key in finding out who the body was. Finally, they would find Griffin that evening. He told the Gardaí that he had spent the night before at his family's home in Galway City. He told Gardaí that he knew nothing about the fire. Griffin was well known to the Gardaí, as were his family. He had previously been convicted for assault and drug possession. He was known as a bit of a loner, and this is why he was squatting on Shane's land, away from everyone. 2 days later, it was reported that Griffin had taken a ferry to Inishmore and had barricaded himself inside a fort on the island. He was throwing stones at people passing, and Gardaí had to be called. At the time, Griffin had a long beard and dreadlocks, which made him very intimidating to people. When the Gardaí arrived, they would have a standoff with Griffin, which would last 5 hours. Eventually, Griffin gave himself up and he was brought to St. Bridget's Psychiatric Hospital in Ballinasloe. Meanwhile, the state pathologist did a post-mortem on the body found in the fire. The body was so badly burned that it could only be identified by DNA, and soon the family would get the worst news possible. It was Emer that had died that morning in the fire. The family were devastated. Emer was only 23 years of age. The state pathologist couldn't pin down how Emer died, but because of the circumstances she was found in, he did suspect foul play. 5 days after Griffin was brought to the psychiatric hospital, he signed himself out, but not before he shaved off his beard and cut his dreadlocks. He made his way back to Inishmore. His ticket for the ferry was bought under a false name. His clothes that he was wearing were found at the cliffs neatly folded. It looked like he had taken his own life by throwing himself off the cliffs. The Gardaí and the sub-aqua teams searched the sea and shoreline over the next few days, but no body could be found. Griffin would have been very familiar with Inishmore as he had family there. Gardaí wanted to question Griffin, even though it couldn't be determined how Emer had died, but the fact that she was found in Griffin's caravan to them was enough to believe that he knew what had happened to her. Also, his behaviour after the fact, and now missing also, cast a suspicious eye on Griffin. The funeral for Emer took place 2 weeks after her death. They waked her at home and then took her to the church. It was a huge funeral. Family, close friends and her friends from college all turned up to show their respects. Her uncle played the accordion and sang Going Home. This beautiful song had everyone in tears. Emer's mother was in such shock she had no understanding of why her casket was closed. Right from the beginning, the Gardaí referred to Emer as a death and not a murder, because they had no official cause of death. Gardaí were still looking for Griffin, and they put out a public warning that if anyone was harbouring him or were involved in helping him disappear, they would be prosecuted. Emer's sister Pamela was not happy about the way the investigation was going and called for Emer's body to be exhumed. And so in 2010, through the Cold Case Review team, she was successful and Emer's body was exhumed and a second post-mortem was performed. It was determined that Emer indeed suffered a violent death. Her throat had been slashed with a machete-type knife, which had been recovered from the scene of the fire. It was also said that she had been badly beaten and had been killed before the fire was set. This is what the family had been waiting for 5 years. Finally, her death was upgraded to a murder. Griffin now was a murder suspect. A lot of time had been lost and the Gardaí put out a warrant straight away for Griffin through Interpol and Europol to find him. Crime Stoppers also put up a reward for information about the whereabouts of Griffin. As for motive for the murder of Emer, her father thinks that maybe she saw something she shouldn't have, or it may have been a sexual motive. While we can all speculate the why, it won't bring Emer back. It is always the question at the forefront of everyone's mind. It was believed that Griffin went to England, then Germany and on to Morocco. It was also revealed that Griffin had a Celtic tattoo across his neck. Specifically, it is on his Adam's apple, but it was later discovered that this was wrong, and it was in fact the tattoo, the Eye of Horus. This, I'm sure, has been either removed or covered up since. When the wanted posters were issued, the tattoo was not visible. Over the years, there have been numerous sightings of Griffin, and Pamela has kept in close contact with the Gardaí. The Gardaí are confident that it is only a matter of time before Griffin slips up, as he was such a troublemaker here in Ireland. He is bound to get into trouble elsewhere. The Gardaí said the case is ongoing and they can't release any new information. But it's not just the public that are being left in the dark, but the family have been told nothing either. There seems to be a lack of trust and cooperation between the Gardaí and the media. The media could be the best chance the family have of finding Griffin, but it doesn't seem to cross the Gardaí's mind. They should all be working together for the greater good in finding Griffin. If Griffin is in Morocco, there is no extradition treaty between there and Ireland. It is nearly 19 years since Emer was murdered, and in 2022 Griffin was tracked down to a drug rehab facility in Scotland, but was discharged before Gardaí became aware of his whereabouts, the Sunday Independent newspaper revealed. In 2016, Emer's mother passed away after a long illness. The people who knew and cherished Emer still miss her to this day, and her memory is honoured in the school she attended. In 2007, they established the Emer O'Loughlin Award for Transition Student of the Year, to commemorate the hard work and leadership she displayed when she had attended the school. Shane, Emer's boyfriend, was absolutely heartbroken over her death. He has never given interviews or appeared on TV, but he did put up a wooden cross on the site where she was murdered, in memory of the love he had for her. I'd imagine it's still to this day very hard on him, as he owned the land where they wanted to build their future together, but instead it ended there. Pamela, Emer's sister, set up a Facebook group to help gather information to bring an end to this case and see Griffin behind bars. If you have any information, please contact this page or myself and I will gladly pass it on to Emer's family. Rest in peace, Emer.